All right. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Megan, and I'm the Community Engagement and Events Manager for Aquifer. This is the second of 3 sessions on formative assessment and coaching. We're on a platform you may be unfamiliar with. To give you the best experience possible, we encourage you to engage in the chat and to post your questions in the Q&A. To activate closed captioning from your computer, click on the up arrow next to the microphone and slide the toggle on. If you're logging in from your phone, click on the small keyboard button next to the emoji icons along the bottom of your screen. If you need to increase the size of the slides, you can do so on your own screen by hovering the mouse over the top right-hand corner of the slides and clicking on the plus sign. I am pleased to introduce our presenter for today's webinar. Today's presenter is Joe Miller, Aquifer's Curriculum Integration Specialist. Joe assists programs in effectively leveraging Aquifer content and tools. In this webinar series, he has been exploring Aquifer's new Calibrate formative assessments and how coaching enhances their impact. I hope you enjoyed today's webinar on coaching for learning.
Thank you, Megan. I'm pleased to be here today. And I'll do a little bit of a look back, but I'm going to take in the full webinar series for a moment. And they have 3 parts, as Megan noted. And in the first part, we talked about formative assessment and a little bit about Aquifer's new formative assessment system called Calibrate. And then in this one, we're going to talk about coaching because Aquifer has a team of folks called the Aquifer Peer Trainers, and it's a board of volunteer educators that really started to dig into coaching last year with the belief that coaching can make an impact on outcomes for students, but came to the conclusion that it was too difficult to do without tons and tons of training. And so this first session about coaching is going to be about their work, or the system that they came up with called Anyone Can Coach. It's designed to simplify it. So thinking through Anyone Can Coach, it was meant to be that you can take these ideas and start to apply them in your daily interactions with students, formal or informal. And then in the last segment, which is next week, we're going to talk about Anyone Can Coach, but in a really even more pared down way, where a couple of peer trainers are going to come next week, and they're going to talk about the coaching script that they've created and how you can use that with Calibrate. So it's going to be a 1-page script, and then they're going to talk about coaching with Calibrate. So last week was Calibrate, formative assessment. This week's about coaching in general, and next week will be about bringing them together in a really pared down way. So one of the things we talked about last week was what makes formative assessment effective, and some of those pitfalls that we want to avoid to make sure that we maintain that effectiveness. And one of the most notable ones among those, so if you weren't here last week, was being careful not to use something other than formative assessment to sort, evaluate, and grade students. So if you start using your formative assessment to do those activities, you will lose some of the inherent value in formative assessment. So if you're using it in a summative way or judging or sorting way, you lose that value that we know we can get from formative assessment. And so I just want to note, and maybe Megan, if you get a chance, you can drop a couple links in the chat. But one is that just there's more information on our website about Calibrate, and I think Megan maybe already dropped that in. And then if you're interested in talking in detail with me about the system, because I'm only going to mention it briefly here and there, I'm not going to show you any part of it. If you're interested in meeting with me, you can schedule a meeting directly onto my calendar, or we also have this option where you can take an 8-question demo assessment. So you can sign up from that by filling out a form, and I think it looks like Megan's dropping some content into the chat right now, and she'll drop a link to that form in there as well. Okay, so like I said, we're going to dig into coaching today and how we at Aquifer have tried to make it more manageable by simplifying what we know about the effectiveness of coaching competencies. But before that, I'm just going to take a step back and briefly talk about Aquifer's vision. So in the first webinar in this series on formative assessment and coaching, we shared Aquifer's intent to build a holistic learning system. This is where learners are given clear direction with targeted learning opportunities through Aquifer cases to engage through Aquifer cases. And they should also be engaging with didactics and patient encounters during their clinical rotations. So This is the Aquifer part, but there should be much more to that. In this vision, Aquifer is one part of this larger system. In the system, there is meaningful feedback from assessments and from skilled preceptors. And high quality coaching is available to all to accelerate and enhance learning. And I'm just going to put a pin in that for a moment, because I think sometimes we think of coaching as something for only certain students. But I do want to say that our starting point was that all students can benefit from coaching. So to do this, we believed that we needed an assessment that supports insights and generates useful feedback regarding a student's clinical readiness and their overall cognitive competence. For this holistic system that we envision, our assessment needs to provide students some direction about what to do next. So it can't just be an assessment when they're done. It needs to be an assessment that provides them some direction. It helps them answer questions about where to invest their limited time and energy. So if we know anything about health profession students, they have a lot of stuff coming at them, and they have limited time and they have to make choices. And so part of this assessment system, as it links to learning content, is it needs to help them make good choices. So Aquifer Calibrate was designed to support that learning. So if you saw last week, you saw a little bit about how the system works and how it allows students to discriminate things that they know and know they don't know, to make better choices about where to focus. So Aquifer aims to connect assessment seamlessly with content to create a complete learning experience. We strive to provide clear direction while generating useful feedback. So again, this is about students knowing what content they need to focus on and then using coaching to continue to advance their skills. And formative assessment is an important part of the system because research has shown that when deployed thoughtfully, formative assessment can have a significant positive impact on student learning and development. Before I go any further, I'm just going to stop, and we're going to do like just a quick poll here. And Megan, if you can instruct us about how to accomplish this poll. Okay, so I think you have to click on the green S that has appeared at the bottom bar. Is that right, Megan?
That is correct.
Okay, so you click on the green S.
Looks like a Skittle.
Yeah, it's a Skittle.
That's a Skittle.
So the poll is, what characteristics of formative assessment must be present to achieve impact? Click all that apply. So it must low stakes, avoids being used for judgment, focuses on feedback to improve mastery skills and attitudes, and empowers self-regulation and reflection.
And Joe, if you answer, which might be cheating a little, you will be able to see in real time the results that are happening right now.
Okay. Are they showing up on my screen, or?
They should be. Did you answer a question? Did you answer?
I did, but are they showing up? Are they presented to everyone, or?
They should be. Can you see them?
I can see them, yes.
That means everybody else can too.
Okay, cool. All right, awesome. Looks like everybody answered. So what characteristics of formative assessment must be present? So all of these must be present for formative assessment to have the impact that we hope for. It isn't about judging or grading students. Instead, it provides meaningful feedback that sparks this reflection and self-directed learning that you marked as the first one. When done right, formative assessment catalyzes growth, reducing uncertainty and enabling focused gains in skills and knowledge. It should be designed to empower students rather than evaluate them. So once you are evaluating students, that's the only thing they think about, and they're less likely to get that formative learning effect from there. Because we want to create this environment where students feel comfortable acknowledging their gaps and working on weaknesses and charting their progress. So summative assessments, of course, have their place. But as noted at the last webinar, if we conflate the two, if we try to use a single assessment to do both grading and then kind of give this formative feedback, we end up undermining the value of the low stakes portion because we lose that learning part, and the students focus on the summative part. So our goal with Calibrate is to maximize the benefits of this formative assessment part and really kick off this learning process that gets students to develop adaptive expertise. And adaptive expertise turns out to be critical to the success of our learners and for safe and effective patient practice. And if you were there last time, we talked a little bit about this, and I'm not going to talk any more about it this time, but it's defined as the ability to efficiently apply foundational knowledge to solve everyday problems while innovating solutions, novel solutions, innovating in the case of needing novel solutions. So adaptive expertise is crucial because medical knowledge is expanding way too quickly for clinicians to know everything. Students must become what are sometimes called master adaptive learners. These are the learners that use that metacognitive self-regulated learning to develop this adaptive clinical expertise. And it's in high quality formative assessment. So it might seem like I made this jump to this new thing, but it's really this high quality formative assessment that contributes to the development of master adaptive learners by generating information for students about the competencies they have mastered, the things they know, versus the things they need more work on. And that's what empowers the self-directed learning and growth in the behaviors required to develop master adaptive learners or adaptive expertise. So providing insights without judgment, formative assessment supports the development of this adaptive expertise. So this is really important in this changing healthcare environment. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this. So I recommend, if you're not familiar with a master adaptive learner, Corky mentioned it, or I did a webinar with Corky Lehman a few weeks ago, and she mentioned this book. It's backwards here, but it's from the AMA. It's called The Master Adaptive Learner. It's edited by Bill Cottrell and others. But it has a series of articles about the development of the master adaptive learner. And I'm not going to get into that, into details about that. I'll cover just little snippets of it today, just enough to focus why coaching becomes important. So becoming a master adaptive learner is a process that starts with planning. That's that blue part up there. The process includes finding your strengths and gaps in your competence. And we at Aquifer always talk first about strengths because we think that's just as important for students to know what they are strong at, because those are things they can apply in clinical practice more comfortably and certainly. And then it's identifying those appropriate resources to address where you do have gaps. For students to fully develop as master adaptive learners, they need high quality information about their strengths and weaknesses. As Bill Cottrell notes, formative assessment data is important. It becomes this stream of information. In this way, thoughtful formative assessment initiates that metacognitive habit required of master adaptive learners. So they need that first step of knowing, okay, here's where I am relative to where I need to go. And that helps them with self-monitoring, goal setting, strategic planning, and deliberate practice. So our aim with Calibrate, of course, was to provide this initial insightful data to promote the development of adaptive expertise. And so then when you go in here and you start thinking about, if you're familiar with the master adaptive learner process, what they talk about is the role of coaching. And so when they talk about the role of coaching, they say, okay, so it's great to provide meaningful information, but you guys know students. For students to develop adaptive expertise, we also need to think about context. So just having information isn't enough. Students need to develop those personal characteristics of learners. Those characteristics, like in what they mentioned in the master adaptive learner context, is curiosity, resilience, motivation, and a growth mindset. Those are the four main characteristics that they think are necessary for students to develop. And I'm going to have Megan put up another poll really quick. And this is like a no right answer poll. This is just you saying, this is what I think is most important. But we're going to ask, which personal characteristic out of those four do you believe is most crucial for developing adaptive expertise? So remembering, adaptive expertise is that ability to adapt to know things, but also to adapt to develop novel solutions in a clinical environment.
Give it another second. For responses. Again, it's the green S circle on the bottom of your screen.
Yeah, so those who have answered so far have broadly agreed that motivation is the most crucial for developing adaptive expertise. And they don't make that distinction, and then mindset and resilience next. They don't make that distinction in the master adaptive learner. It was just kind of, turned out curious what you guys would think. But all these personal characteristics enhance the metacognitive habits necessary to become a master adaptive learner. They help students to persist through challenges, embrace critical feedback, and take greater ownership of their learning. And this is where coaching comes in. Coaching provides the support and direction to activate those personal characteristics. Coaching, as they say in the master adaptive learner context, is a rheostat that turns these characteristics up, making growth more efficient. So formative assessment feeds in and gives information, but it's coaching that can turn these personal characteristics up. So in today's session, we're going to describe an approach to implementing the coaching mindset that will accelerate the development of the necessary personal characteristics of curiosity, resilience, mindset, motivation, and added on metacognition, because that's kind of the big one. The characteristics necessary to fully develop adaptive expertise. In a moment, I'm going to talk about coaching and these personal characteristics. But before I go any further, let me just talk about the brief structure of this webinar. So we're going to just cover this in 3 short parts. First, I'm going to briefly talk about what the research says about how coaching enhances those personal characteristics and competencies that are so vital. And I'll summarize some of the key evidence, but I also will have a handout which hopefully I can drop into the chat because I'm not sure I gave it to Megan ahead of time. And then the second part, I'm going to talk about how we defined coaching for learning, because this was really key to us, was to think about how we get it to just down to the skills, just down to the skills that are going to promote growth. And then part of this our definition may challenge some of your assumption about what coaching means. And then finally, we'll introduce Aquifer's Anyone Can Coach framework. And this is, in our mind, it's really easy to use. It's a set of tools that will be included in your handout. And this is, as noted, anyone can coach, even for educators with minimal coaching expertise. We want you to get into that coaching mindset. We'll leave some time at the end for some questions if you have anything regarding that needs clarity. And also there's a Q&A button at the bottom that Megan will monitor and bring to my attention if there's some things that need to be addressed in the moment. All right, so let's talk about this together. So first thing we're going to do is talk about the key benefits. And in the handout that you'll receive, there'll be a much more detailed description of these. So studies show coaching promotes curiosity and lifelong learning. It builds critical thinking skills, adaptability, reflective practice, and proactive learning strategies. By igniting deep curiosity, coaching moves students beyond just memorizing facts. Research also demonstrates that coaching develops resilience. It cultivates self-awareness, mindfulness, stress management, and positive mindsets. The resilience enables students to thrive under pressure. In addition, coaching has been proven to increase motivation by supporting goal setting, self-efficacy, and growth. This motivation drives persistence and academic achievement over the long term. Coaching also reinforces a growth mindset. It helps students embrace challenges, critical feedback, and the constant improvement that's required to be an effective clinician. And finally, coaching advances metacognitive skills like planning, monitoring progress, and self-directed learning. This leads to more deliberate, meaningful development. Studies confirm that coaching builds the critical skills, behaviors, and mindsets to propel learning. It also happens to have the added benefit of improving well-being, that is mental health. And there was a really fascinating study done with third-year medical students that had coaches and the impact it had on their mental health well-being. And let me just see, I don't think that you have this. Is that right, Megan? So I'm going to see.
That is correct.
Okay, sorry about that. I think this is pretty easy, so I'm going to attach a file here. And there it is.
You'll see it in there, and then you'll have to hit the little send button.
Yeah, I'm going to drop it in here. All right, so I have sent that, I believe. All right, and just so you note in that handout, what we've done is We've summarized the research for a variety of categories. And you can see those categories are shown here in the handout in green. And I touched on a really brief summary of several of those areas, but these are many of those personal characteristics that are talked about in the Master Adaptive Learner. And then we just kind of added on some really fascinating tidbits, which was that, the impact of coaching on performance, particularly in the surgical context. And then also a really fascinating study by Rigo and others about the identification of at-risk students, that just the fact that a student had a coach resulted in a lot more effective and early identification of at-risk students and success in getting them where they needed to go. So that's summarized in the handout, and there's a bibliography at the end that cites the references that are in there. So I'm going to switch now to what is coaching, because look, I've just argued that coaching can have impact on these personal characteristics that matter so much in developing adaptive expertise. And as single sentences, it sounds really compelling, but what is it that we have to do if we're going to be successful and achieve those outcomes? And when we talk about coaching, what most people think of is an experience related to sports or the arts, like singing or dancing. And this is where a coach is telling you what to do and really guiding you through that process. But here's the thing: when we talk about coaching for learning, the type of coaching that we're talking about for these purposes, those coaches may not be the best comparison. Sports coaches often have a hierarchical relationship with their athletes, where they provide instruction, motivation, and feedback. And if you think for a moment, the last time you watched a sporting event, if you watch sports, you think about how did the coach behave, and they often insert themselves into the game. They dictate the many of the players' choices. And I think about, my when I have watched sports, what is the coach doing on the sidelines? Maybe if it's football, they're calling the play. Maybe if it's basketball, they're pointing to where they want the players to go. This is very different from coaching for learning. A coach for learning is a thinking partner who works for the learner and with the learner to help them reach their best vision of themselves. It's a person who helps the learner move from where they are to where they want to be, who supports their learning of new complex skills. And so in contrast to other types of coaches, a coach for learning focuses on a collaborative relationship with learners that results in more efficient and effective identification of the learner's strengths and gaps in performance. It increases the quality of the learner's goals and improves the learning strategies chosen to achieve those goals. And remember that the ultimate goal is for the learners to develop the skills and competencies to coach themselves toward adaptive expertise. So we're going to dig in a little deeper to what coaching is by answering 3 important questions. So we've often used this for a couple of years now at Aquifer since we've talked about coaching, and we've said, okay, so when you answer these 3 questions, this is really the essence of coaching. So in the handout, we actually have something related to this in the Coaching for Learning handout. There's a 6-question checklist that you can kind of check in and see where you fit on this. And we recommend that checklist sort of prior to doing a coaching relationship with a student, just to remind yourself. But I'm going to answer these questions. So let's start with who's the expert. And this one's going to feel a little odd to folks, but in Coaching for Learning, one of the fundamental characteristics is that the student is the expert. And as an educator, I know this is quite different from the roles we're used to playing, and many of the peer trainers would say this over and over again. They're used to being mentors and advisors as much as anything, and this is much different for the faculty and for the students. When students come to us for mentoring, they're used to us serving as experts. So we've been through it before. We've walked this path, and they want our guidance. They want insight from our experiences. They want to be told what to do. And then when we think about advisors, these are people who help students with program-related things such as scheduling, job applications, maybe letters of recommendation, really getting students the information they need and bringing down that barrier to their success. Advisors often have a limited view of the student's strengths and challenges. In the case of a learning coach, the faculty must find that they must adjust their perspective. And so most people that have taken on a coaching mindset will tell you that it feels sometimes significant the way they have to change. So the first thing is that they have to defer to the learner or the student as the expert. The learner is the expert in this relationship with respect to their values, motivations, strengths, and gaps. This is also a very different feeling for the learner. They're used to programs that are evaluating them, putting them in buckets, and deciding where they fit. The learners may need a little help in making the adjustment, perhaps even more than the faculty. When we empower the student to lead, we show them that we respect them and that they know themselves, that they have the power to implement plans and change. And I know what I'm describing sounds different, maybe a little uncomfortable even, but bear with me. We need to find ways to empower students to take charge of their learning. And this is an important approach that can motivate that change. So the next big question is like, who does the work? And now that we've answered that first question, I think you're probably going to look at the second one and you're going to say, okay, it's obvious. In the learning coaching model, the learner is the expert, so they also have to do most of the work. And this part's great. This means that the student is the one who identifies their strengths and gaps. The student is the one who sets the learning plan in motion, and the student is the one who checks in on their success along the way. In short, when it comes to the learning coach relationship, and a coaching meeting, the student should be empowered to set the agenda and do the work that is required. So this is both theoretical, like the student should be working, thinking about their strengths and weaknesses, but also when it comes down to coaching, you should really plan from day one to be handing off these tasks like setting an agenda and driving those meetings if you have formal meetings. A learning coach should focus on remaining curious. So you have a job too. You're thinking about what's going on with the learner and avoid diagnosing their problem. That's a real trap for us. A learning coach asks probing questions to help see the student's strengths and gaps. We must avoid jumping in and fixing the student's problems. And the coach focuses on exploring possibilities as opposed to going in and helping the student fix everything. And again, this is probably going to be the hardest part. We want to be fixers, and often that's what the students expect from us. However, to develop these master adaptive learners, these folks, these future clinicians that are going to self-coach, we need to remain open to possibilities as opposed to prematurely focusing on just one idea. A learning coach works hard to empower the learner. We can sometimes be too quick to jump in with approaches that worked for us, which is not empowering the person you're coaching. And ideally, the learner you're working with sets the agenda and the focus and can identify what success looks like. And the coach just guides the learner through the process of setting goals and supports their accountability. You may provide affirmation, feedback, post questions designed to evoke self-discovery. And the last question is, who does the talking? And again, this is going to be obvious. In a coaching for learning relationship, it's the learner that should do most of the talking. The educator or coach is doing a lot of talking. It probably means you're advising or mentoring them. So that's an easy check-in. My former colleague, Sherilyn Smith, who's an expert coach, she used to say, the best way to stop talking is just to keep asking questions. And I think it's really good advice. And there's two questions in particular that I'm going to mention now, and I'll mention again later. And the first one that I learned in my coach training was, and what else, is a really effective question because it keeps the student thinking. And the other one is by when, which gets the student thinking about what they need to accomplish and puts it on a timeline for them. Of course, coaching, mentoring, and advising, look, at times they're going to overlap. The behaviors of a coach are not rigidly defined, so sometimes you're going to have to play different roles. But your main goal is to really think about trying to apply the coaching mindset. If you to help you determine if you're like coaching for learning, we put that coaching checklist on page 4 of the handout. And just like asking yourself those 6 questions in the checklist. And if you answer yes to each one of those, it's a good bet that you've adopted the coaching to learn mindset. Okay, so one thing that I want to point out, and I don't know on here, if you actually are a trained coach, I'd love to hear about it, where you got your training, what type of coaching you're trained in. But I was trained as a general coach. And so the coaching competencies that I followed were the ICF coaching competencies, which has 11 coaching competencies. It's a significant number. It takes a significant amount of time and dedication. But then it's interesting, there was a paper published about coaching in medical health professions education, and they identified 15 competencies. So when you think about that, it's like, we know, like the research shows that like coaching can work really well. It seems really positive, pro growth mindset, pro where we need to be headed. And then you realize, like, when folks talk about framing coaching, they're like, oh, you have to do all of these things. And that reality is something that, as the peer trainers, Aquifer, we were like, this isn't going to work. If we want to scale coaching, we need to do our best to simplify this. So the peer trainers broke this down into 6 main coaching competencies: relationship, communicating through active listening, facilitating new learning, fostering accountability. And then the last 2 are things that a coach themselves has to do: demonstrate professionalism and pursue continuous improvement. And really, it's these 6 competencies that if you're deploying effectively with a student, that the student's going to learn those skills and they're going to get the benefit of coaching, the type of benefits that I described early on that improve those personal characteristics. So what the peer trainers did, and this is the last section in this webinar, is that they said, okay, given those 6 competencies, what is it that we could develop that would make it easy for somebody to deploy this with their students? And so the first thing they said was, look, we need to agree across the board that coaching depends on more on the coach-learner relationship than techniques. So I'm going to talk about techniques in a moment, but they said, look, if you don't have the relationship, the techniques aren't going to help you. So the foundation is a trusting connection. Not just having similar personalities. In fact, it turns out that the research has shown that having a similar personality between the coach and the coachee or learner does not have an impact on the effectiveness. Research shows that successful coaching isn't connected to matching interest or personality. So a surgical resident or somebody interested in family medicine or a particular tract of nurse practitioner, they don't have to be matched with a like person. What matters are in these key relationships are these elements: that you promote learner agency and co-inquiry, you empower the learners to take charge, genuine interest and focus on the learner's needs, being vested in understanding and facilitating the learner's growth and goals, being careful not to assume what their goals are, creating psychological safety. This is establishing an environment where learners feel safe to be vulnerable based on care, concern, and respect. This often means showing a genuine interest in the student as a person. This psychological safety, you can imagine the importance, if you're in a coaching relationship, of a student knowing that sharing their formative assessment results with you is a low stakes step to take. And then the last one is balanced authority and friendly behavior. And this is really this maintaining a supportive and respectful relationship, avoiding dominance due to position or expertise. And this is a really tricky one because we know that the students see us in your role as being an expert, and your position is often one that has some level above them, some hierarchy above them. So it's really, the coach really needs to be careful depending on what role they take. And then with this trusting relationship established, the students will feel much more empowered. And it may take a time or two, but keeping in mind that this is important. So now that we've covered this critical role, I'm going to get into the components of this anyone can coach model. And this is the core of this, of what the peer trainers did, where they broke these 11 and 15 coaching competencies into these 3 parts. So what they did was simplify the skills and competencies of an effective coach. The idea was to create an academic coaching program that equips educators at all levels with the basic knowledge and tools needed to excel as a coach. This streamlined 3-phase, so it's going to have 3 phases, aims to make coaching accessible and effective for everyone. And we'll take a deeper dive into the 3 phases and the tools we've developed to support them in the coming slides. The first, I'm just going to do an overview in a moment. And I also want to acknowledge that next week, this model is going to get distilled down even further into a single page. So what you'll see in the handout is kind of a full page for each one of these areas. What you'll see next week is a single page of what it looks like to kind of stream through the model. So the first phase is the evoking awareness. This is where coaches utilize active listening and powerful questioning to facilitate reflection, helping learners develop that strong self-awareness about their strengths, gaps, and goals. And this is a really funny one because as I've talked to folks over the last 9 months about formative assessment and how they're working with their students, one of the things that comes up most often is that students don't actually know how prepared they are for the clinical rotations, and they really struggle in this self-awareness, the self-reflection part. So that first part is your evoking awareness so that they become more self-aware. The second part is facilitating growth. This is where a coach collaborates with their learner to prioritize focus areas, create learning plans, and set achievable goals. And I think the main thing you're doing is just really helping students by asking questions to clean out the things that they don't need and to change strategies that aren't working for them. And then lastly, in the foster accountability phase, this is where you support the learners by helping them set deadlines, make public their accountability plan, and offer support. You aren't their accountability. You aren't their checklist. You're just fostering that within them. So with this model, educators of all experience levels can implement the coaching mindset and associated tools to support learners in developing and leveraging the skills of master adaptive learners. Different from the coaching competencies I discussed before, which focus on what a coach must do, the Anyone Can Coach model is focused on how students get outcomes from this. Okay, so in the first phase of the coaching relationship is to evoke awareness. And this is the learner's awareness of where they are and where they need to go. An effective coach keeps the focus on the student's goals and empowers them to lead the way. Coaches aim to evoke awareness through active listening and powerful questioning. So you've heard these things before, active listening and questioning. Okay, so active listening means showing that empathy, understanding, and respect for the learner's thoughts and feelings. This fosters a supportive environment where the learner feels comfortable opening up and sharing their expertise, their experiences, challenges, and aspirations. It isn't just sitting there. You can demonstrate that you're active listening by asking good questions. These are those clarifying questions. And then in the evoking awareness, you're also, you help the learner shift their focus from problems to solutions, fostering a proactive mindset that encourages growth and change. It enables the learners to make informed decisions and set achievable goals for personal and professional development. This understanding can lead to improved decision-making, better communication, and stronger relationships. And this is all about the learners taking ownership. When they do, they tend to be more accountable for their outcomes. And in your handout, there's a set of these powerful questions. And one of the things that we did early on, because when we were running the pilot, people would often ask us, like, well, if I'm going to coach a student, like, what should I ask them? Like, how do I start a conversation, or what's a good question to ask? And so since all the peer trainers have been trained coaches, we got together and started creating this list of questions. And ultimately, over time, we pared it down. And that ended up in your handout. And we broke them into 5 different categories. And they're sort of questions and prompts. But the key to this is that you're using open-ended questions or probing questions. These are thought-provoking questions that help the learners explore their thoughts, beliefs, and assumptions. And really, it's kind of about this critical thinking about yourself and gaining new perspectives. So you want to be really careful that these questions are open-ended, as I noted, not yes/no questions, but really challenge the student to then do the majority of the talking. And we put these into 5 different categories that are up on the screen. These are those prompting questions. That was our first category because people be like, I don't really know how to start a coaching conversation. So you'll see a set of questions in there. Clarifying questions, these reflective statements that you get students to think about by just making a statement. And then these questions we call, questions that interrogate assumptions. They're sort of questions that, like, students have a lot of assumptions about how learning works and how their learning works. And there's a set of questions in there that help gently allow the student to question those. And then just these general evocative questions. They evoke some sort of awareness, but they don't fit into any one of those other categories neatly. They play unique roles in building rapport, deepening understanding, and fostering this self-awareness, and promoting a learner's growth. And if you've either been a coach or been coached and you've been a part of, like, asking these types of questions, in theory, it seems really interesting and engaging. In reality, it's really exciting and fun, and you feel very. My experience by being coached was how thrilled I felt about my possibilities, because my coach was really good at making these clarifying questions and reflective statements, which helped me clarify my own thinking. So, just going through those things like prompting questions are things like, how would you describe your current goals or aspirations? And this is getting this conversation started, and you'll know if you've been been part of a coaching relationship or trained as a coach, it's really starts with goals. So the coach is trying to elicit some of that. These clarifying questions is like, tell me a little bit about how you integrate the shelf exam blueprint into your study guide. So it's just like clarifying, give it to me. It helps me understand. If you give me an example of how you do something, that's a good one. The reflective statements are like, so if I understand you correctly, you're saying, and so you're sort of allowing the student to clarify what they mean by reflecting it back to them. And then the interrogating assumptions, things like, can you identify any potential biases that could be shaping your assumptions? So kind of getting them thinking about what it is that led them to believe something. And then evocative questions are just these general, if you were to envision your ideal outcome or success in this situation, what would it look like? By the way, that is like a really great question. And it was one that when I was coached, it was really hard, but got me thinking and got me excited. And so remembering the key to effective coaching for learning lies in this active listening, empathy, asking these thought-provoking questions. It really helps bring out the learner's experiences and goals. So we want to use these questions to support learners as they gain their insights. But once you've evoked their awareness, like, what do you do next? So they're aware, but they need to go somewhere. And so this is that next step. And this is that facilitating growth part. So this is where the coach is like, okay, so we've started to evoke your awareness. Now it's the facilitate growth. And this is interpreted as the phase where we tell students how we did it. We mentor them on how to be successful. But really, this is a place, and there is a place for that stuff. But when we're coaching, we're encouraging learners to make informed decisions, not telling them what to do. We want them to reflect on their learning strategies. So think about, just take a moment and think about the learning strategies that your students use. You want them to reflect on those things and consider implementing new approaches. And important in this area is prioritizing, creating a plan, and tracking their progress. You can guide learners through this process by assisting them in those things. It's important to note that students have a set of learning strategies that they apply to every situation, or most students do. Sometimes this is effective. However, research has shown that students often don't apply effective approaches. And it's interesting, just last week I had two different conversations with programs that were where they were talking about this. They brought it up, really deeply engaged medical schools, and they're focused on how they help students learn how to learn. And this is a common refrain that students don't know the science of learning, or they know less than we think they know. And so having something to share with them that will expand their strategies and challenge their assumptions can be really key. And we put in the handout, what you'll see on this next page is this lighter purple background is a handout of learning strategies. And Cindy Lord, who has done this podcast or this version of this webinar in the past, will say that she'll often, this is really important to her to have this handout, but also inquire with students, like, what strategies have been most effective for you in the past, and how can you build on those strategies? And the thing that she'll say is, like, it doesn't matter what the problem is. Students try to apply the same strategy over and over and over again. So far we got the facilitate growth phase, this is where the coach provides guidance, encourages resources or a link to learning strategies, and then supports the students with open-ended questions to encourage them to reflect. And you can find a list of those questions on the darker purple background. This is also in your handout. I think these are on pages 8 and 9. So there's the practical tips and strategies, I believe, on page 9, and the questions to facilitate growth. So once you've evoked awareness with our learner, and then we facilitated growth, these are the first two phases in this process, of coaching, the question is sort of like what to do next. And this is that accountability portion. And we have called this fostering accountability because interestingly, we first started talking about enforcing accountability. And it became this point where we were like, well, it's not the coach's job to make sure that they're accountable. It's the learner's job to be accountable for themselves. And so we started talking about what we can do to foster that feeling. So our focus shifts to ensuring our learners have an accountability plan. Fostering accountability is not a process where you become their helicopter parent, make sure they're doing what they said they're doing. Coaches should really aim to foster this like self-accountability, ownership, responsibility for personal and professional growth. So instead of a checklist or set of things for you to do, what we decided to do as a first step in this three-phase part is really just say, okay, here's some fundamental principles that empower learners to lead, develop self-reliance, and build resilience. So if you stick to these fundamental principles as a coach, you will encourage self-reliance and accountability among students. So these are the 6 principles. And again, these are deeply or more deeply described in your handout. And you can see that handout on the page right now. But one of them is establishing clear timelines. And I mentioned this earlier where I said one of the most powerful coaching questions, and probably my favorite to use, and also was my favorite when I was coached, was by when. Because it ensured that once I said I was going to do something, that I started to fit it into my regular work life or my regular life and started to think about what was clear and realistic about what I was choosing to do. And I think this can be a really powerful question for students and can be used a lot. And then it's encouraging learner-led accountability. So this is where they're like self-reliance, self-discipline, and a strong sense of personal agency to achieving these objectives. And so one of the questions we encourage you to ask at this point is, how do you plan to hold yourself accountable? So we know there's tons of research on this, that having an accountability plan significantly increases success. And so I'm going to draw a popular culture example from this. You guys may have heard of Noom. And this is one of my favorite examples. This is this diet app, Noom, and it uses psychology to improve eating and lifestyle habits. But one of the first things that they do for a user is they have them select an accountability partner. And I've been previously selected as somebody's accountability partner. That's how I know this. And I received an email and it said, here's this person. They want you as their accountability partner. They're making public what their plan is. And here's some ways you can support them. And then there are actually times along the way where the person's moving through the process and they have to like reset a goal. And they have to send it to their accountability partner before they can get approved to move to the next level of the process, which is a really amazing plan, because it's saying, I am making public my goals, which is one of the clearest ways to hold yourself accountable. The next is to offer support without overstepping. You ask, we do this in coaching a lot. One of the last questions you ask when you're trained as a professional coach is how can I help? But I think I want to remind you here that you're not their secretary. So your job isn't to remind them of things or to do things for them, but it's opening that door of saying, I'm still here. Like, we can talk again in a month or something, so I'm still here. I'd be happy to check in. And then scheduling regular check-ins and progress overviews. This is really up to the student to lead, but you can reinforce this by just saying, when should we talk about this again? And the student may say, I think I got it from here. Or they may say, you know what, it's really important. We should check in again in a month. My experience is like, people want to talk again if you ask that question. And then the next one is celebrating success. Of course, when people are successful, this builds confidence, and then maintaining that that balance between support and challenge. So there is a little bit of supporting the student, but also challenging them and turning them back into, asking those tough questions. And our belief here is that if you apply these principles or keep them in mind when you're coaching, you'll enhance the effectiveness of the support. Okay, so what we did at the end was to say, okay, so that's a ton of stuff. There's 4 kind of categories there. There's relationship, there's evoking awareness, there's facilitating growth, there's fostering accountability. If you want to kind of check in where you are, we put a self-assessment in there. with a set of questions that align with those components. And this is on pages 12 and 13. You can download this assessment. You can check in with yourself from time to time. And we strongly encourage you to take this part of the Anyone Can Coach model and think through those phases. Where are you in the process? Are you evoking awareness among a student? Pick a couple questions off there and try it out. Are you facilitating growth for a student? Try a couple of those questions, maybe encourage the students to take a look at some of the science-based strategies. Are you trying to foster accountability? What questions can you ask there? What principles do you need to stick to? And we're coming towards the end of our session here. So I'm just going to go back to the master adaptive learner here. And I want to say that, like, if we're going to increase the expertise by developing master adaptive learners, coaching can have a significant impact. We know that becoming a coach can seem like a daunting task. So today we introduce you to this simplified model, a set of handouts that we encourage you to take from. You do this by chunking the coaching engagement into 3 parts. So think about which part you're in with a student. Am I in evoking awareness? Am I facilitating growth, or am I fostering accountability? And they will overlap a little bit at times. But just get started by taking some of these resources and trying to adopt this mindset. Use these questions, use these resources. I was recently chatting with a health professions educator from California who's actually a trained coach. He went through intensive coaching training, and I asked him how it was working with the students, and he said, look, the biggest problem I face is that students require insight to their problems. Otherwise, it does not work. And his take on this was, I'm going to give them insights. I'm going to tell them what they're doing wrong. But our take on this is a little different. We agree with this approach that insight is hard to come by, but that what learners need to know is what's worth changing to engage in these relationships. And that's where formative assessment comes in. So next week, we're going to take this even shorter, down to a single page, and we're going to take the Anyone Can Coach model and merge it with formative assessment results. So if this seems like a lot, if you come back in a week, we'll boil it down to the 1-page coaching script and 1-page student note-taking template. And we'll talk about the pre-selected questions that you can follow to go through the Anyone Coach model to make it even simpler. So with that in mind, that will be next week. And we'll have 2 peer trainers that will be delivering that webinar and talking about their experiences and clarifying the script that they helped develop. And so I think, Megan, if you want to drop my email in. Okay, so we had connectivity issues I'm seeing now in the Q&A. Was that solved, I hope?
I didn't have any on my end, so I'm not sure.
Okay, sorry about that. I did see that pop up along the way. So my email's in there. Megan also at some point, she put the webinars in there. Yeah, so Danielle's asking a question. And also, Megan, can you drop in my Calendly link if anyone wants to schedule a meeting or take the demo assessment? So can a coach see if a learning plan to-do list is being completed after an early assessment? It depends. So, so if the student has completed a learning plan and they share that learning plan with you, and you don't have like high-level access within your organization, you will not be able to see what cases they've completed. So if on their learning plan it says, I'm going to do family medicine cases, 5, 7, and 9, because those are areas that I struggled, you will not be able to go in and see whether they completed it. They would have to tell you that. If you have high-level access in your organization, like you're a curriculum admin or the program services administrator, or PSA as we call them, you would be able to see what courses students have completed. But no, they would have to share their learning plan with you again if they wrote any progress updates. Any other questions or? And the other thing that we have available is that if you wanted a peer trainer to come to your program and do any training around coaching, you can reach out to us either through my email or schedule a meeting with me, and we can get something set up for you if you are interested in having a coach training, particularly related to the script and Calibrate. Let's see, any other questions in here? No, no other questions. Okay, so if there are no other questions, I hope that folks will come back next week and join Kim and Cindy for the final webinar in this series.